I see. All right, let's try with start with number 1. Um, okay, so x squared minus 12 equals 0. So we're going to do the square root method from last week. So first, you add the 12 to both sides, right? And square root so that we get x is equal to plus or minus, right? And by the way, 12 is 4 times 3, so that is, let me just write the answer. Hopefully you're all pretty good at this now. And you have your calculator too, right? You can just plug in radical 12 into the calculator and get 2 root 3. Okay, number 2, we have to add 15. So we have 3y squared is equal to 15. Divide by 3 both sides. We get 5. And then square root both sides. So we get y is equal to plus or minus radical 5. Number 3, it's the square is around these parentheses. So we do have to square root both sides like that. So we have x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus, so this is 4 times 5, right? So that's 2 radical 5. Lastly, we have to add 2 to both sides. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus 2 radical 5. Number 4, we have to get this quantity by itself. So we add 15 to both sides. So we get 3x minus 2 quantity squared is equal to 15. And then we can take the square root of both sides. So we now have 3x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus radical 15. Radical 15 does not simplify because it's 5 times 3. So now to solve for x, we add 2 and then divide both sides by 3. So right now 3x is equal to 2 plus or minus radical 15 and then divide by 3. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus radical 15 all over 3. Okay, do you remember all of this? Did you have any trouble with it? Let's continue with completing the square. So I'm going to zoom out so I can use some space to the left and right. Okay. Hopefully you can see the problem to the right now. Alright, so number 7, completing the square, right? That was what we learned last Friday. Okay, so what we did was we first, well, this one is a is 1, right? So now we have to move the constant term to the other side. So we first start off with x squared minus 4x is equal to 5. At this point, we take our b. Our b here is negative 4. And we multiply by a half. Right? Or divide by 2, multiply by half, right? Same thing. And we get negative 4 over 2 is negative 2. So negative 2 is squared, and we get positive 4. And that's what we add to both sides. Right? So we have x squared minus 4x, and then we're going to add this 4 to both sides of this equation. So 5 plus 4. By adding this 4, we have now completed the square, right? We have a perfect square trinomial on the left-hand side, and this minus 2 that we got earlier is the factor, right? This is the binomial factor x minus 2. Quantity squared is equal to 9. Now we can take the square root of both sides. So we square root both sides, and in doing so, we get x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus Radical 9 is 3. And then lastly, we have to add 2. Now, we get two solutions. We get 2 plus 3 equals 5, and 2 minus 3 is equal to negative 1. So I'm going to write x is equal to 5, or x is equal to negative 1. Two solutions. So that was number 7. Let's take a look at number 8. I think I signed up to 10, right? Yeah, number 8. So number 8 says x squared. Oh no. Let me write it down first. So that was number 7. Number 8. X squared minus 8x minus 9 equals 0. Let's do that one in orange. Alright, our first step, what is that? It's to move the constant term, right? To the other side. Oh, that's a pretty thick, let me see here. Yeah, that's the wrong one. Let's do x squared minus 8x is equal to positive 9, since we added 9 to both sides. Next, we take our b and multiply by half to get negative 4. Negative 4 is what we square to get positive 16, to add to both sides of the equation. So on the left-hand side, I have x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to 9 plus 16, so that the equation remains balanced. So this is now a perfect square trinomial, and x minus this 4, right, is what we get on the left-hand side when we factor. So x minus 4 quantity squared is equal to 9 plus 16 is equal to 25. So we can square root both sides, and we have on the left-hand side x minus 4 is equal to plus or minus 5. So as I add 4 to both sides, I get 4 plus 5 is equal to 9, and 4 minus 5 is equal to negative 1. So my answers are x equals 9 or x equals negative 1. Does anyone have questions about these two problems? Alrighty, let's take a look at number 9. So number 9 is, let me just copy this down. Number 9, w squared minus 10w minus 3 is equal to 0. Okay, so we will start by adding the constant term to both sides. We get w squared, let me zoom in a bit, w squared minus 10w is equal to 3. Again, we take our b and multiply by a half, or divide by 2, and that's equal to negative 5. Negative 5 squared is positive 25. So we have w squared minus 10w, and then we add the 25 to both sides, is equal to 3 plus 25. On the left-hand side, we can factor w minus 5 quantity squared is equal to 28. Then we square root both sides. So on the left-hand side, we just have w minus 5 is equal to 28 is 4 times 7, so that's plus or minus. Square root of 4 is 2 root 7. Right? I'll write this here. Radical 28 is equal to radical 4 times radical 7 is 2 radical 7. Or you could just type that into the calculator, right? Last step is to add 5 to both sides, right? W is equal to 5 plus or minus 2 radical 7. And we cannot combine those because they're not like radicals, right? 5 doesn't have a radical 7. Therefore, you just leave the answer like that. Any questions? Last but not least, we have number 10. Number 10 is y squared. I'll do that over here. Number 10. Oh, I want to stay consistent. Let me use this. Number 10. Y squared plus 3y minus 1 is equal to 0. Okay. Go back to my... I guess I'll use red this time. We first move the constant term to the other side. So now we have y squared plus 3y is equal to 1. We take our b, multiply by a half to get 3 over 2. So this one was probably a little trickier because now you're dealing with a fraction, right? So we have to take 3 over 2, square it, and we get 9/4. This is what we add to both sides. So y squared plus 3y plus 9/4 is equal to 1 plus 9/4. Right? And if you just remember, when we factor the left-hand side, we're always going to use this b times 1/2, this 3/2. So this shouldn't be that difficult. This is just y plus 3/2 squared is equal to, remember 1 is 4 over 4, right? So that's 4 plus 9 is 13 over 4. So hopefully you're pretty comfortable with these, or you can just type it into your calculators. But the thing is, if your calculator converts it into a decimal, I wouldn't approve of that. We want to keep these into nice fractions. So when we square root them, we can keep them as they'll probably be radicals and integers. You don't want to, you want to keep it exact. All right, so now we can square root both sides. And on the left-hand side, we have y plus 3/2 is equal to plus or minus radical 13 over radical 4. Remember how you can split this up into two radicals with that quotient rule? So we get radical 13 over 2, right? So plus or minus radical 13 over 2. Now last step is to subtract 3/2, right? So when we subtract 3/2, we get minus 3/2 plus or minus radical 13 over 2. And we should write this as one fraction. Meaning if these denominators were different, you would have to find the least common denominator and then combine it, right? But these are the same. So we have negative 3 plus or minus radical 13 all over 2 would be our final answer. Any questions?